I hereby open this academic ceremony in which Iulia Falcan will defend the academic thesis, and I hear an echo, because then you can't. Probably you have to switch yours off. Yeah, let's see whether that's better. So I open this academic ceremony in which Iulia Falcan will defend the academic thesis Transition towards a Renewable European Electricity System. What are the implications for the power technology mix, pan-European power trade, and the electricity market? And I wish to extend a warm welcome to the people physically present here in the aula today, but also to the guests online and the members of the opposition. It's a very special occasion today, and I would like to invite the candidate to present a summary of her study and the conclusions of her thesis.
Highly esteemed prorector, thank you for this introduction. Dear highly esteemed members of the degree committee, family and friends, welcome to the public defense of the results of my PhD research project. In their sixth report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concluded that the observed increase in global temperatures over the past 7 decades are very similar to the best estimate for the contribution of human activity to global warming. Over half of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the increase in temperatures are due to contribution from the energy sector, of which the electricity sector accounts for 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union decreased by 10% over the past decade. This was due mainly to the displacement of power generated by fossil fuels with power generated by renewable energy sources. In my research project, I wanted to understand the implications that the transition to a low-carbon electricity system in Europe has on the current electricity system. More specifically, my research developed around 3 main questions. What is the energy technology mix of a low-carbon electricity system in Europe? What are the effects of electricity from renewable energy sources on the electricity price and its variance? And what are the effects of electricity from renewable energy sources on the convergence of electricity prices? In the next 10 minutes or so, I will discuss the main results of my research project. In the second chapter of my dissertation, I look at the effect of power trade on the energy mixes of different European countries. And in a second part, I look at how this energy technology mix changes for different levels of power trade. I use data for 4 European countries that cover the variation in weather patterns across Europe. The results show that the requirement in installed capacity for wind power stay relatively constant over the different scenarios for power trade integrations that range between electricity systems that are completely isolated and national electricity systems in which trade flows unrestrictedly. However, despite the relatively constant aggregate installed capacity for wind power, the country-wide distribution almost reverses between these 2 extreme scenarios. On the other hand, the requirements for installed capacity of solar power decrease by more than half between these 2 extreme scenarios of completely isolated electricity systems and a scenario where trade happens unrestrictedly. Similar to the case of installed capacity for wind power, the country-wide distribution of installed capacity of solar power also changes considerably. How do these variations in the energy technology mixes translate into variation of costs across these different scenarios of power trade integration? The cost savings associated with the scenario of unrestricted trade are 40% compared to a scenario in which countries have completely isolated electricity systems. Most of these savings occur up to the level of 25 power trade. And also, while the aggregate costs decrease significantly, some countries will experience an important increase in their cost due to energy technologies being disproportionately installed in countries with the most favorable conditions for wind and solar power generation. In the third chapter of my PhD research, I switched the focus to existing electricity markets and look at the effects of electricity from renewable energy sources on electricity prices and their variance. I used data on 10 European countries over the 3-year period of 2015 to 2017 to understand the effects of electricity from wind and solar technology on both electricity prices and their variance. I find that electricity from renewable energy sources has a downward effect on day-ahead electricity prices. This is in line with the existing literature. The magnitude of this effect increases slowly as the share of renewable energy in meeting demand increases. The effect of electricity from renewable energy sources on electricity price variance is positive in the sense that electricity price variance increases as the share of renewable energy in total demand increases. Unlike the effect on electricity prices, the magnitude of this effect increases very strongly with the share of renewable energy. When I look at the individual technologies of wind and solar power, I see that these effects are mainly due to power coming from wind technologies. For the countries and time period in my analysis, the effect of solar power on both electricity prices and their variance are not statistically significant. This may be due to the fact that the share of solar power is much lower compared to the share of wind power in my analysis. In the last research chapter of my dissertation, I extend the analysis of electricity from renewable energy technologies on domestic electricity markets to understand their effect on electricity markets of the trading partners. I use data on 8 European countries for the 3-year period from 2015 to 2017 and find the same downward effect of electricity from renewable energy sources on electricity prices. This again is consistent with the literature. However, the literature looking at the relation between electricity from renewable energy sources and the convergence of the electricity prices of different electricity markets, it's ambiguous. It is geographically clustered and reverses over time. In this chapter, I wanted to understand the reason behind the seemingly inconsistent results. And I find that the effect of electricity from renewable energy sources on the convergence of electricity prices on different markets is moderated by the sufficient availability of interconnector capacity. In other words, in the presence of sufficiently available capacity of cross-border power network, electricity from renewable energy sources leads to a convergence of electricity prices. However, in the absence of sufficient interconnector capacity, excess power generated by wind and solar technologies widens the gap between domestic and international prices. Together, the results of my research aim to help to understand some of the challenges ahead of the low-carbon electricity system transition in Europe. They provide a cost estimate associated with a completely unrestricted European power system. The results show that the downward effect of especially wind power on electricity prices increases slowly as the share of renewable energy in total demand increases, while its effect positive effect on variance increases very sharply. Also, my results find that the interconnector capacity acts as a moderator on the effect of renewable energy, on the convergence of different electricity system of trading countries. I would like to end my presentation on a few thoughts on the low carbon electricity system transition in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. 2020 saw carbon dioxide emissions drop by 6.4% globally. In Europe, this drop was slightly larger. These numbers hide very wide variations both between countries and across different points in time in 2020. And they are due mainly to reduced activity in the transport sector. More than half, actually, of the emission reduction is due to reduced activity in the transport sector. In the electricity sector, emissions were 3.3% lower than in 2019. This was due to two main reasons. Decreased absolute demand that mainly affected fossil fuels, and also increased absolute contribution of power generated by renewable energy sources. However, these effects were short-lived. Carbon dioxide emissions have already surpassed their pre-pandemic levels, and this was due mainly to increasing demand for coal, especially in Asian countries. This is despite the fact that measures for economic recovery have included a more explicit focus on the low carbon transition around the world. For example, in the European Union, the European Commission has revised upwards its 2030 targets for emission reductions to 55% compared to the 1990 level. This is compared to the initial target of 40%. This suggests that after a consequence of the economic measures for economic recoveries are set to increase the differences in regional speeds for the transition to low carbon economies. Thank you for your attention, and I give the word back to you, Madam Prorector.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation, Mrs. Falcan. The setup of today is that all members of the degree committee present physically and online will ask a question one by one to have a conversation on your topic today and the research you conducted. And we have to be very strict in muting and unmuting, otherwise it will be very hard for our members online to follow us. So I'll try to have a look on the red signs that indicate who is muted and unmuted. So let's give it a try. The opposition will be opened by the chairman of the assessment committee. That's Professor Pierre Monen. He has a chair in microeconomics of technical change at the Institute of UNU Merit Maastricht University. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Iulia, congratulations. I always consider a good thesis a thesis where I learn something. And I learned from reading your thesis. It's very clearly explained and very easy to read. So very nice job. I would have a question to you concerning the way you measure the cost of different sources of energy. And I'm particularly referring to chapter 2, where you try to find the optimal capacity of different sources of energy, given exogenous trade, given exogenous cost of the different energy sources. So when you think of these kind of energy sources, you think of investments, and the cost of a capital good is, the user cost is the price of the capital good times basically the depreciation rate and the interest rate. But in terms of cost in a more medium long run perspective, wouldn't you also have to take into account installation costs, switching from one type of source to another type of source, and maybe even longer term costs like cost of new technologies coming up and distorting the old sources of technology, including these type of costs, would it make a difference to your analysis?
Highly esteemed professor, thank you for your words and for your question. Yes, indeed, many energy system models some energy system model can have a very high level of granularity in terms of the aspects they cover. What I included in chapter 2 were mainly the installation costs. And this was because I was interested in how the energy technology mix changes for different trade levels. So that was the ultimate goal of chapter 2. I think the final number indeed might have varied if I included a different level of detail of the cost, but considering that I did not include, I had the same approach for all scenarios, I think that it helps to understand the variations across the different scenarios of power trade. So to answer your question, yes, I think I would have come up with probably different numbers, but I was interested mainly in the direction and magnitude of the difference across the different scenarios. So I wasn't necessarily interested in the final price tag of a system, but at how the total cost would change depending on the level of power trade.
And I guess switching on and switching off solar energy is probably not very expensive. It's probably a little bit more expensive, I guess, for wind energy, but still probably not that expensive that it would make a big difference to your result. Am I right?
Yes, indeed. They would not be the cost would not be that high, and especially they would not be that high compared to conventional power technologies. And I did not include conventional power technologies in the energy mix in chapter 2. So I think that would have made a much more difference, or that would have required a much deeper level of analysis.
Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Sabine Fuß. She's also a member of the assessment committee. She holds a chair in Nachhaltiges Ressourcenmanagement und globalen Wandel at the Humboldt University in Germany. And we are very glad that she can be present today online. And from my side, there's a big screen at the right-hand side, so we can see you clearly. We hope that you can also see the candidates, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I see everything very clearly. So, dear candidate, dear Iulia, first of all, I would really like to congratulate you on your thesis. I think it's a major achievement, and I really very much enjoyed reading it. I especially appreciate your methodological approach, combining different quantitative methods, which enables you to really effectively address your research questions. Now, my question builds a little bit on my predecessor's questions, because if you look at your modeling chapter, the setup is rather stylized. You're focusing on 2 renewable energy technologies, wind and solar, storage and cross-border grid extensions in a greenfield setting. And that's very adequate for the kind of research questions you ask in your thesis. However, in reality, practitioners are being faced with an existing energy mix and basically the challenge to transition away from it. And they also consider other carbon-free options, such as nuclear, carbon capture and storage, maybe not so popular in all of the member states, but definitely an option on the menu of others. I also understand that there's a certain scope to a PhD thesis, but I think as a question in a defense, I can challenge you to go a little bit beyond your boundaries and ask you to share your thoughts on how considerations of existing and planned infrastructure and also other technologies would impact your results.
Highly esteemed professor, thank you for your words and for your question. Indeed, I agree that there is a wide range of options that I could look at in energy technologies in general. So both in power generation and also the level of details of storage technologies. The answer related to nuclear energy is quite simple. So nuclear energy is not considered a renewable option in the European Union approach. So that was an easy decision early on. And for the other technologies, I think I looked at technologies with low fuel costs. So I did not want, I know there is an upper limit of around 10% of potential for biomass. So that option, I didn't think it would have made a big difference on the energy mix, probably only considered as a somehow storage option. And I was interested really looking at the effect of the potential for cost savings in an integrated pan-European power system. And I would say that the comparative advantage is more pronounced for wind and solar technologies than, for example, for hydropower. It could be argued that it's somehow lower, it has a lower variation across countries than wind and solar power. And other technologies such as tidal energy, I think they still have a lower contribution compared to solar and wind power. So just in a few words, I would say I was interested in the potential for cost savings associated with a pan-European electricity system, and this would be given by the weather variation across Europe, which would affect mainly wind and solar power technologies.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Olaf Slijpen. He is also a member of the assessment committee and holds a chair as a professor of European economic policy at Maastricht University. He is also present online and we can see you loud and clear, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Iulia, let me also first congratulate you with your thesis. Yeah, just like Professor Monen, I also learned a lot from reading it, which is indeed always very good. The results are quite intuitive, but there's nothing wrong with that. And it's always good to see that intuitive results are supported by research. My question actually has to do with something you referred to already a little bit at the end of your presentation, and those are the proposals of the European Commission in the context of the Green Deal, the Fit for 55, and let's say how that influence your analysis and results. Let me be a little bit more precise. An important part of the Commission proposals is the extension of the ETS, so as to make the CO2 pricing mechanism more forceful. And in addition to that, the European Commission also wants to introduce a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, indeed, assuming that CO2 prices will increase, how does that affect your analysis and your results? I could ask that question for chapter 2, 3, and 4. I'm not going to do that because that would be too much. I'll leave it up to you to choose one of the three chapters to answer that particular question. Thank you.
Highly esteemed professor, thank you for your words and for your questions. Yes, the Fit for 55 package is quite broad, and I was happy to see the upgrade of the ambition. I would focus on the chapter 2 of my thesis because I think of my dissertation because I think it includes the most explicit policy choices, and they're not explicit in the chapter, but I would say they're more explicit relative to the other chapters. And the policy choices would play out in terms of the level on power trade, because in my analysis, this is an exogenous level. I would say that the new measures would affect my results at, or would affect the transition to a low carbon European power system at different levels. First, it is the direct level on power generation activities, which, as you said, which were included in the previous emission trading schemes and will be included in the next. And this the new emission trading scheme will be extended with to new sectors. So I would say if in the previous schemes, the emissions trading scheme would affect directly the power generation plants, now it would affect the downstream industrial consumers of electricity that would be included in the new emission trading schemes. So it would have a similar effect in increasing demand for electricity from renewable energy sources and or due to increased carbon prices. Other implications of the new legislative package are the revision of the directives for renewable energy and the directives for energy efficiency, which again would impact indirectly the installed capacity of renewable energies by targeting the industrial consumers, both industrial and household consumer, but especially industrial consumers. So I would say I would expect the new legislative measures package to accelerate the transition to low carbon economy compared to its previous format.
Good, thank you. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Cornelis Blok. He's also a member of the assessment committee, and he's a professor of energy systems analysis at the Technical University in Delft. And we are very glad that he can be present today online. The floor is yours. You need to switch on your microphone. We cannot hear you.
Okay, dear candidate, for your introduction and for your interesting thesis. In your introduction, already mentioned that you didn't find effect for on energy prices on electricity. And we talk about chapter. One explanation that the share is relatively small, but in your thesis, you explanation.
Excuse me, Professor Blok, but we have difficulties hearing you. There's something with the audio or your microphone. Sometimes a word falls apart and we cannot hear it. I guess that would be difficult for the candidate to answer the question, huh? If you don't hear the question.
No, good, yeah.
Let's try again.
Yeah, okay. My point is, you work in chapter 3. Yeah, there's still an echo.
But it's much better now, thank you.
Okay, I'll continue then. Anyway. In chapter 3, you work with with daily average solar energy production, and you give an argument for it, which has to do with the fact that all these prices are settled at the same moment. So you say it doesn't make sense. But I would say there is still a difference in prices per hour, and there is difference in solar energy production, a very notable difference between day and night. So you still could have done the regression. So what would you have found something then? And so why didn't you do the regression? And if you would have done it, what do you expect you would have found?
Highly esteemed professor, thank you for your question. If I understood it correctly, it refers to the difference, the potential difference in results if I had used hourly electricity prices in chapter 3 instead of aggregated over the entire day, as I did.
And one more question. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you work with hourly prices and production?
Yes, the answer to this last question would be that all prices are determined or hourly prices during the day are determined the previous day at the same time. So the hourly prices during a day do not act as do not display time series characteristics. So it would not fit the profile of a time series analysis. And the other related answer would be that this is the standard procedure in the literature. But a different approach would be to look at, to group the different hourly prices within a day in peak and off-peak prices, or really to create 24 time series for each hour of the day. I was interested more in the long run effects on both the electricity prices and variance, but I agree with you that it can be an interesting idea for further research to really either cluster the hourly prices in peak and off peak, or to look at 24 time series.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Mark Sanders. He is a professor in international economics at Maastricht University, and he's present on site today.
Yes, thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Iulia, from me also, congratulations on, I think, a job well done. I think you've produced a very well-written thesis on a hot topic that is really dear to my heart. So I very much enjoyed reading it. And of course, given my title, I have to focus a bit on chapter 4, where you discuss intensively the trade aspects. So in chapter 4, you analyze electricity trade between two countries. I have a few questions on that chapter. There's a theoretical part and there's an empirical part. And on the theoretical part, you start out by saying, let's assume there's two countries, and one is twice the size of the other. And then you say something that surprised me a bit. You say, then that means that demand is higher in the larger country, that's clear. But if you double the size of the country, so is supply. So I wasn't clear on why you then assumed that prices would be higher in the larger economy. What would be your motivation for that assumption? Start there.
Highly esteemed professor, thank you for your words and question. I think the thinking behind that was the fact had to do mainly with electricity, with the prices of electricity from fossil fuel plants. And in that case, prices increase as demand increases. So into countries in which one country has higher demand, the fuel prices would also be marginally higher than in the first countries due to higher demand.
Okay, because you then go on to assume, that the quantities of trade, so imports and exports, are exogenous given these price differences, and that somehow surprises me. I would think that electricity is one of the most homogeneous goods we have, and if there's trade in electricity, prices would would have to equalize and quantities would adjust. Instead, you assume quantities are what they are, and then you analyze the impact of trade on prices. And I was wondering, are you not getting it the other way around?
Indeed, electricity is a homogeneous good. In the theoretical framework of the fourth chapter, I tried to simplify the merit order model that I discussed, I think, in the introduction, and then I came back to it in the third and fourth chapter. And there we can see that electricity prices is given by the unit cost of the last technology to meet demand. And I assume that in a bigger country, there is a higher chance that more technologies contribute to the power mix. More fossil fuel technologies contribute to the power mix. So there is the base load, and then increasingly, usually power from gas plants contribute. So I assume that, I mean, the electricity price of the same technology, say, constant, but given the fact that more technologies contribute to meeting a higher demand, the electricity price is given by the last technology to meet demand compared to a country with lower demand, where the electricity price would, for example, probably stay satisfied by the baseload power plants.
Okay, those are assumptions you can make and motivate. Thank you for that. Is there still a little bit? Okay, then on the empirical part, I was wondering, because you linked this to an empirical analysis, and of course, then this subduction, let's say, is in translating the model directly to the empirics. But you have the share of trade in total production as your proxy for the traded amount. And then you don't have any controls that might let's say, change the dependent variables, so your volatility and price differences apart from that particular mechanism. And one that I would be thinking of is if you have demand fluctuating and there is a fixed capacity for exporting and importing, then the exports, the trade is given by that fixed capacity. If there's a price difference, that will be the quantity traded. But the share of that quantity in the total production depends on the demand side. And so it fluctuates with the demand. And then factors that drive demand would drive your independent variable. How does that affect your results, the interpretation of your results?
In the literature, there are different ways of proxying basically for the trade capacity. I think the most used was the observed price differential between two countries. So my choices, the way I saw them, were really looking at trade, and instead of using the absolute share, yes, indeed, looking at the absolute amount, looking at the shares in demand, because the countries are the sizes of the countries differ quite a bit. And another option would be to look at the constant capacity of interconnectors among different countries. I would say the main value added of looking at the calculated share of power trading total demand would be that I would get an upper limit of the possible, of the potential for power trade between two countries.
I guess we need to continue. Thank you.
It's an interesting discussion. We leave it here for the time being. We might pick it up again in the second round if possible. We would like to continue the opposition with Dr. Huub Meijers. He is an associate professor at the School of Business and Economics of Maastricht University.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Iulia, Also, many thanks for inviting me for this festive and important session on defending your thesis. The research on the transition of the electricity market towards a sustainable power supply is, as many already had said before, of utmost importance, and your thesis is a very timely contribution to that important discussion. So thank you for that. Of course, I have some questions, and I have some more specific questions this time. And I refer to the model in chapter 3, and specifically the findings in table 75, page 75, table 3.2. You show in that model and in these estimation results that price changes are affected by changes in the share of renewable energy, if it is measured at all levels. And then you start digging into that finding, and you have different levels at the use of renewable energy, and then you find that there are differences in the price effects of renewable energy. And you draw also this conclusions from that. In your words, you say this is an important finding for the debate regarding the redesign of the electricity market, etc., etc. And when I was looking at this table 3.2, I have some questions about this table, and I think you are in an excellent position here to help me in understanding that table and these findings. So in your model 3 in the chapter, you have entered these levels of renewable energy use, and then you find different impacts. And you refer that these impacts are different for these 4 levels, though you do not mention whether this impact is significant, yes or no, and maybe you can highlight a little bit more insights on that. So if it is so important, my question is, how can we see that the differences are so important also in a statistical level in significance? Related to that, you add also a variance equation to the price equation, and there you see also that in the variance equation, at the lowest level of renewable energy use, the variance, the contribution to the variance is 0. So I was wondering, looking at these results, is there somehow a relation between these 2 findings? Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on these findings, and so that we really understand whether the merit order effect is still in this table, and how we can see that and how we can learn from that?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your words and for your questions. So if I understood correctly, your question refers to the findings in model 3 or in table 3.2 and the 0 result in the model 4 on the effect of electricity from solar power. I would say that the relation between, especially in the second equation on electricity price variance, the relation between the model 3 and model 4 is explained by the fact that data on electricity by solar power plants show a much lower contribution compared to data on wind, on the contribution of wind power. I think it never goes to the 2 digits. The share of solar power in total demand never reaches 2 digits, whereas the share of wind power reaches up to 40%. I mean, these are numbers from the top of my head, but they are in a table here. And in terms of the different levels of power trade, I would say that the effect of electricity from wind power on the price variance is the aggregated effect of all the levels. But indeed, if we yeah, when we look at the different shares, so the 4 quartiles are identically populated. This is why I divided the different thresholds. So yes, the idea, I mean, one way forward would be to look at both solar and wind power, to look at the threshold for each. But I would expect, especially for solar power, these thresholds to be very, very low. So even the highest threshold would be very, very low. I did not do this yet, so I didn't separate the contribution of wind power in 4 quartiles, but yes, that would be an interesting next step.
Thank you so much. I see that microphone is a bit playing around with you. I don't know what happens, but it's good if you keep an eye on that. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Serdar Türkeli. He's a researcher at UNU Merit Institute of Maastricht University, and he's also present online today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prorector. Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Iulia, I would like to first congratulate you, your parents and your family, friends, and actually your supervisors, for bringing out very well written thesis. My question will first relate to your table 4.2. I pretty much see the temporal dummies that you deemed relevant for your model. But I cannot see some geographical variables relating to the input for renewable energies, such as heat levels, wind speed, distance to the equator, maybe even, and as well trade of renewable energies between these countries. Can you just explain me why you deemed these kind of variables irrelevant for your price estimation?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your words and for your questions. My answer to your question has 2 parts. The first part would be that I aggregated the hourly observation across the whole, all the countries. So I potential country differences would fade away when I look at the coefficient of variation. And a bit more detailed answer would have to do with the appendix 4A at page 112 and 113. I tried there to give a broader view of the differences across countries, but indeed I didn't focus on this discussion in the body of this chapter. So yeah, the dependent variable is the coefficient of variation of the cross-sectional electricity prices for a given hour. So it is not the weighted price of each country, but it's calculated as a cross-section. And I try to put the discussion on the country level variation of both electricity prices and the share of renewables in each of them in the appendix. But I agree, they could have added to the story in the body of the chapter.
Thank you. If I may follow. One more question.
Sorry, can you say it again?
If I have time, I will just continue. Or
you can have a second question.
Yeah. I would like to ask about this connector capacity, because there's a little bit ambiguity. Whose responsibility is that? Whose investment make the connector capacity be determined? Because there's a degree of technological investment there. And whose responsibility is it?
In many cases, it is the European Commission. But in this case, I would say that this capacity has been here for some time, and it started as bilateral cooperations between different countries. I don't think there is one-fits-all answer to your question. I think it really depends on the really geographical focus of the interconnector capacity, but it is assumed to be a public investment that is eventually socialized.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means that all members of the degree committee asked at least one question, and thanks to your concise answers, that implies that we can do a second round of questions. And please allow me to propose that we do this in reverse order. So that would mean that I invite Dr. Huub Meijers for his follow-up question, if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Prorector. It's a follow-up question, though it is not a follow-up question in the sense that it is a completely different question. And that regards more to chapter 2, I think, and also maybe 4. But chapter 2, you in your modeling, you end up with the conclusion that if there's free trade and you have storage capacity sufficiently, etc., that then wind and solar are located in 1 or 2 countries in Europe. And so that means also that a lot of investments and so capital flows are flowing around in Europe, and as well as if production starts in these plants, then there is these transactional flows you have throughout Europe. And then my question related to that is, of course, there are political dimensions to that. You mentioned that also in your thesis, but also economic dimension, namely the stability of the euro. You have a lot of intra-European trade of energy. So what does it mean for the stability of the euro if you would enter in the electricity markets as you sketch in your maybe most extreme, but in your extreme outcomes of chapter 2?
Thank you. Yes, I would add on that question that it's not only the stability of euro, but also the price difference within countries from euro area. Because in my chapter 2, the 4 countries have euro as their currency, but the power purchase parity varies quite a lot. Again, the second chapter was intended mainly as a framework for further analysis, and the extreme scenario of unrestricted trade, that was, yes, hypothetical. That's why I also insisted, I mean, it was mentioned before that the conclusions were quite intuitive, but what I found interesting was that the biggest cost savings occur up to the 25% trade level. So what I wanted to emphasize is that, yes, the power integration doesn't need to go all the way to capture some of the potential cost savings. And that trade level is more in line with the current heuristics of increasing the power trade integration to 15% up to in the next 10 years, up to currently 10%. I think there will be changes in again, in electricity prices across Europe. I think there will be, I mean, the findings from chapter 4 points to increased convergence if there is available interconnector capacity as the share of renewable energy increases. And this combined with the merit effect of renewable energy on overall electricity prices. So I guess taken together, the increase of power generated for renewable energies and the ideally coordinated increase in interconnector capacities would limit the price effects and would lead to more homogeneous determinants in electricity prices. I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a relevant question, but I don't think it was an explicit focus so far.
Thank you. Then the second round in reverse order will be continued by Professor Mark Saunders.
Thank you. That's really a joy. Because I also wanted to ask you a question about Chapter 3. And I think it follows up a little bit on what Professor Block wanted to ask about that chapter as well. So you empirically want to investigate the impact of renewable energy penetration on electricity prices and on volatility of electricity prices. And you use the hourly electricity prices, and then you split your data to get a proxy for the penetration of renewable energy. You split your data in quartiles on the actual production of renewable energy. Is that correct? The amount produced as a share of the total.
The share in total demand.
In total production demand, yes. Okay, so I note here that that's not the share of renewable energy in installed capacity, but in actual production. And my question is actually, in short, is that accurate? But let me elaborate a bit why I think we can discuss that. Because, of course, on average, production with renewable energies is going to be proportional to the installed capacity, but that's not the case in every hour. When the wind blows, you can have high renewable energy production with low penetration. And when the wind doesn't blow, you can have low renewable energy production with high penetration. So by turning it into these quartiles, you're putting together observations that have high penetration and low penetration, and you're considering them the same. And my question is actually, well, if you were to fix that, or if to do that differently, would that change your results? If you were to analyze this with the share in installed capacity instead of the share in actual production, would that not be more accurate for your research question?
Thank you for your question. I think it would lead to different results, but I'm not sure it would lead to more accurate or interesting results, because also the level of demand has effect. The effect of renewable energy on electricity prices is also dependent on the demand. So I think that by taking the share in actual demand, I try to represent the actual effect of renewable energy on demand in a more accurate way. So the way I calculated those shares is that I looked at the hourly levels of power demand and the hourly levels of generation from renewable sources. And my thinking behind that was that, yes, for low levels of demand, the same level of power generation from renewable sources would have a different effect. So I thought that by looking at including the level of demand.
Just finish your sentence and then we finalize this part.
Thank you. My thinking was that by including the level of demand, by taking the share, I would capture this effect that the level of demand has on, moderates the effect of electricity from renewable sources on the prices.
Thank you. Dear Mrs. Falcan, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee here present and online will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. And I invite you and your company to await the results of our deliberation and our return in this room here. Mrs. Falcan, the degree committee here present and online has assessed the quality of your thesis and of your defense, and in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. And Dr. Siesemer is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. So I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority invested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Iulia Falcan, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
And then it's my pleasure to invite your supervisor, Dr. Van Zon, to say a few personal words in a laudatio for you.
Okay, this is quite unexpected. Does it do something? Yes. Okay, dear Julia, it's now my turn to say all kinds of laudable things about you, because this part of the ceremony is called the laudatio. The problem is, however, not that there's nothing laudable to say about you. After all, you have shown to the public present here, unfortunately not a very big public, but you've shown that you can perform all the tricks that are necessary to obtain the doctor's title. The problem is rather that neither Thomas nor I know a lot about you, let alone that we know all kinds of things that are especially laudable, or at least laughable. The only thing that I do remember relatively vividly is that I had a hard time trying to figure out what you were actually talking about when you tried to sell your thesis subject to me. The problem is that you were a lot more knowledgeable in using power engineering terminology than me. I'm just an old economist who knows about production functions, but almost nothing about how electric power is actually produced in real life. So our first conversations were somewhat awkward. Also, because you sometimes looked at me with disbelief in your eyes when I didn't get what you were saying. In the end, I had the illusion of having convinced you somehow that it would be very nice to expand upon the things that I was working on myself at the time, namely multi-stage optimum control models, and then throw in some power generation technology portfolio theory to cover the societal transition from carbon-based to non-carbon-based power generation. A great idea, just about right to make for a very interesting thesis, I thought. After a while, you handed in a stack of pages, not about optimally controlled intertemporal power investment portfolios, but about batteries, which I thought were amongst the dullest things on Earth. But then I realized that this signals the distinction between Iulia, standing with her muddy boots in the global warming swamp, trying to find solutions that would actually work, as opposed to me in my ivory tower, thinking of things that are nice to look at, but that do not necessarily correspond that well to what is really happening out there. So I surrender to you. Because what the world needs right now is not just love, but people like you who can think of pragmatic solutions to the pressing problem of global warming, rather than people who think they know how the world should work optimally until time infinity, and then derive what we should be doing right now from such an infinitely long optimal behavioral program. By the way, this need for pragmatic people is corroborated by the latest IPCC report about the state of our planet. If you don't get nervous reading this, you must have either nerves of steel or you are a zombie already. And I think that the IPCC report is a clear sign that our ivory tower days are over and that we should aim for practical measures that would work almost immediately. So from that perspective, I think that Iulia's thesis fits our present needs a lot better than the original thesis proposal did. However, I do think that your technology portfolio is a bit limited, containing only wind and solar energy, while nuclear energy is at least a technically feasible option too, when the aim is to reduce CO2 emissions. I would like to remind you that you actually did cover nuclear energy aspects in your master thesis at SPRU about the British electricity policy, which content-wise at least is not such a, is only a relatively small step removed from your current PhD thesis. Hopefully, your PhD thesis will turn out to be a giant leap for mankind, and I'm now loosely quoting Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. But whereas Neil produced a giant leap for mankind by taking a small step himself, your battery baby steps could have been a whopper of a leap for mankind if only you would have had the guts to include, and I quote from your SPRU work, quote, controversial investment in new nuclear fleet, unquote, as a power production option in your PhD thesis. Anyway, that is all water, or should I say hydro, under the bridge now. So the only thing that I can do right now is to beg you, Iulia, continue your research and help us survive this new stage in the history of mankind. I'm very confident that you can do this because you're a doctor now. Congratulations, a job very well done, and good luck saving the world.
Dear Dr. Falcan, after these beautiful words on behalf of your supervisory team, it's my great pleasure on behalf of the Board of Deans to congratulate you with the honor that you have acquired. And since we are in this hybrid setting, I immediately offer the opportunity to our degree committee members present online to say a few words of congratulations to our newly established doctor here. So please allow me to shortly give the floor to Professor Fuß for a few words to our new doctor.
Dear Dr. Falcan, dear Iulia, I want to congratulate you also with this achievement, which I think is you really wrote a splendid thesis. And I'm a little bit irritated because there's an echo. But this is not to diminish my heartfelt congratulations to both you and your family. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the echo, but we could hear you very well. I would like to continue with Professor Slijpen.
Thank you, Prorector. I'll keep it short because those of you who are participating in the ceremony online are being plagued by an echo. But that's not the most important thing. Iulia, I really would like to congratulate you. Very good thesis. Very topical, I really enjoyed reading it, and also a very good defense. I totally agree with Adriaan van Zon that continue working on this topic, which is so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then we hand over to Professor Blok. You have to switch on your microphone.
Yeah, Julia, also my very warm congratulations. Well, deserve it. It's a very important topic. As already said many times. What I also appreciate very much is that people in this area of energy and climate and resources. And I wish you a lot of that area.
Thank you so much. And then final word to Dr. Türkeli.
Congratulations, Dr. Falcan. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And that's the spirit, I think. Struggle with the mic as well. I kindly invite everyone here present for a short photo moment on the stairs in the hallway of this building, and after that for a short reception in the rafter. And I hereby declare this ceremony to be ended.